My name is Cody Kraus, and I'm a real estate broker owner that's obsessed with everything real estate. Investing, building, selling, developing, farming, you name it. I've been doing this since I was 18 years old, and I've learned a ton through trial and error, and I've met some of the coolest people ever. This is a show where I invite these people on to talk about their experiences and mine, plus everything else real estate. Let's go. Welcome back to the Everything Real Estate Show. Today I have my friend Evan Will on with me. Evan, who is Evan for the audience?
I'm a paralegal instructor at Clair College, and I spend my days doing paralegal work for people all throughout Windsor and sometimes London and Toronto, actually.
Cool. So Evan and I have known each other since we were 4 years old.
Oh, yeah.
We went through school, basically JK to grade 12, and then we ended up going to the same university. But you completed your university, and I dropped out. You went to university for history?
Yeah, so I went for business and history.
Business and history, that's right, because you were at Odette too. So business and history, and then you ended up going back to college, right, to become a paralegal. You didn't have aspirations from when you were a young boy that you wanted to be a paralegal when you grew up. Can I ask you how you fell into becoming a paralegal, or what guided you towards that, or why did you want to become one?
Yeah, aside from the fact that my parents claim that my great-grandfather swore up and down that I'd work in law one day.
Okay.
Law was never really on my radar. And funnily enough, I remember the conversation that we had when you decided to leave university. And it turns out you were right. The thing is that the university degree didn't really do anything for me. I ended up actually working in a factory, DJ Galvanizing, which is now ArcelorMittal Windsor. I was kind of like a temp worker, kind of like, working the continental shift. And it was actually really late on one of the night shifts one night where I kind of just lost it. You know me pretty well, and I'm not exactly the whole physically intensive type of guy. And I just couldn't take it anymore. And Krishma, my fiance, and we were talking, and she said, "Hey, why don't you try law?" I was like, I don't really know. And she said, well, business and history, put those two things together, and that's kind of what you get. So
I wouldn't have made that connection, but it's true.
It's because in history, it's all about making arguments using things to back you up, right? So the question becomes, was Nero a bad emperor? And then it's like, okay, well, we need to find examples of what makes Nero a good or a bad emperor, and then we'll, write a paper on it, or we'll write a book on it, or whatever, in history. And so that same mentality really helped me out when I went back to college.
A big part of law is precedent set from past cases, right?
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of that. So I ended up, at the time, when we found paralegal at the college and we found that I qualified for it, I had to reach out to the coordinator there because admissions were long closed. It was a couple of weeks into September, and there definitely wasn't room in the program. But the coordinator, she was great. She took my call late at night because, of course, I forgot I was on nights because those factories can be so bright inside.
Yep.
Took my call, got me set up, and actually I was attending the program and not even enrolled in it for easily a month until somebody dropped out, and then they snuck me in.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was one heck of a journey. I didn't know what I was getting into, but it turned out that if there was one thing university helped me with, it was that. Once I got into college, compared to the challenges that we faced, like academically in university, nothing could stop me. I didn't even have to try. You want perfect grades, you got them. Papers, nothing. Everything just laid down. It wasn't a problem. And
you're passionate about it.
I'm really, really grateful for university for that. They definitely helped me develop that kind of like mindset.
The work ethic.
And then the Odette School of Business, excellent, because, we got a lot of my classmates in college, students nowadays, they might have one side of things. They're kind of business savvy and they're good with numbers and they're good with understanding like the realities of the business world, but then they can't write a research paper. Or we have research paper students who have never so much as even paid rent. And I fell more into the second category where I didn't understand as much about business, but at least I knew accounting. There's an accounting class to college, no problem, so.
Now, paralegal is kind of like a broad, you could specialize in a lot of things, right?
Yeah, so the license pretty much, to make it easy, it's things like traffic tickets where there's no jail time or like light fines or other offenses. There's employment law. So like working with helping employees if they've been wrongfully terminated, stuff like that. Then there's small claims court, a lot of small claims court, and landlord and tenant board, along with really any of the other tribunals.
Contract law is a big part of it.
Contract law and the small claims court, yeah, it's a big part of it. Between private individuals, between businesses, it stops making a difference at some point, to be honest. Like, business is business and people write contracts and agreements between each other. Even employment law, which I also teach at St. Clair, it has a lot of contract talk, a lot about enforceability, that kind of a thing.
Well, you want everything in writing these days, that's for sure. And like going back to the university chat, like the advice that I will give my children when they're getting closer to that age is, look, if you know something specific that you would like to do, it's going to make sense that you, if it's required, that you would go to university for that thing. Example, doctor, lawyer, accountant, nurse, whatever. You cannot practice those things without an education that precedes it, that's specializing in it generally. Right. Going for a general program could, like having business administration, I don't think it's ever going to hurt you, no matter
Definitely
what job you're going into. However, I do think that it's not inexpensive. It's certainly, there's a cost associated with it, and it's usually 4 years of your life, right? So if you could specialize, spend a little bit less time in school, but focus specifically on an outcome, paralegal, like even to become a realtor, it's technically through Humber College, but it's not a classroom setting where you have semesters and things like that too. So there's a lot of very specific careers that you can go into without a university degree, but rather a diploma from a college, but in a very specific field.
Yeah, as someone who I have a lot of education, I like to think I do, and I've worked quite a bit now in education.
Yep.
The times have changed really, and I remember you were the first one who told me, like back in the day, like, hey, Evan, what is the objective of this education? What is it doing for you? And I didn't really understand that at the time. And I'm lucky that, the schooling that I took just worked out and helped me get a leg up in paralegal. Otherwise, it wouldn't have done anything really for me. And that's where like having a vision is a good thing.
Yeah, I don't think there's any bad education. Like the more knowledge you possess, it's always going to benefit you.
Well, it's more likely you're going to be of use for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially things like business for sure.
Yeah. But for me, it was more, I'm paying for this degree and I'm investing a lot of time into it. Is there a specific outcome or objective that I'd like to obtain from it? And if the answer is no, then I need to terminate and then refocus and then go apply that money, time, effort in something that does have a specific objective that I'd like to get from this.
Exactly. And, part of the St. Clair thing in order to get licensed, you have to attend and get a diploma from a certified college. And then you have to write a test with the government.
Yeah. So then your university obviously helped you from the academic setting, and then you come in, you get your diploma in paralegal, and then you have to apply to the law society too.
Yes, you do. And you have to write the licensing test, and you have to meet a bunch of criteria that at least St. Clair, but I believe the other colleges who do it as well, they help you meet all that criteria. There's other things beyond the diploma, but it kind of wraps into one.
Yep.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So I was renewing my driver's license at City Hall in Windsor one day, and I ran into you in the City Hall, and I'm like, what the heck? I haven't seen Evan in probably like a year or two. What are you doing at City Hall, Evan? And you're like, oh, I'm just filing a whole bunch of landlord tenant board applications. And I'm like, excuse me? Like, I have tenants. I have issues. I'm a landlord. We need to talk more. So you and I went and grabbed a beer and some chicken wings, and we were talking specifically about what you were doing and what a lot of your day entailed right now. And I'm like, I'm actually going through an issue right now, and I take a lot of things very personal that I shouldn't take very personal. But I was having an issue with one tenant specifically, and it was really bothering me. And I shouldn't have let it bother me as much as I did, but I realized that I have a hard time separating business and personal. So once I realized that you were kind of specializing in LTB matters now, I was like, this could be a very good thing, because if I employ you to help me out with this, it's going to remove my emotion from it, because I'm not going to be dealing with the person directly. And so that kind of, what was born out of that was a relationship that you and I have had professionally now for probably 5 or 6 years, at least anyways.
Yeah, definitely.
And so you're a paralegal and you're operating with Jon Sparling's office, and you're a contractor for them. You're a contractor for me. And now you're also teaching at St. Clair College. So it's kind of cool. They all play in with each other, because you're learning a ton at the firm, and The colleges, what I do think is really neat is they typically like to employ instructors that are active in the field.
That's right.
I did this 20 years ago. They want people that are practicing, right? So they get their students up to date with today's practices and everything like that. So you ended up going to college, you got your paralegal, you got accepted into the law society. You got a job with a great paralegal who's kind of been mentoring you in Windsor.
Yeah.
Now, what were you practicing everything, or what sparked you to specialize in landlord tenant board specifically?
Yeah. So what got me to Landlord and Tenant board was actually Jon. So a little bit of a story there. So part of the education for paralegals, you have to do a field placement. And that's where the college usually reaches out and tries to get members of the community to take students in the summer, like between the classes. And I had Jon as my placement instructor. And so when I was there with Jon, we did a lot of small claims, we did a lot of LTB. And after I had graduated, he decided that he'd, give me an opportunity, but there's one caveat.
Okay.
He wanted to absolutely throw me to the wolves. He said, "You'll be okay. I'll make sure that this doesn't end in disaster, but I want to just throw you out into the wild and see what you can do."
So he wanted you to get battle hardened.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate from this, actually. I didn't realize for a couple of years how fortunate I was that he wanted to do this. Took a first day, whole stack of landlord tenant board papers. And that was back when we were in Mackenzie Hall still. So that's like on Sandwich Street. So he would whole pile of papers, send me down to Mackenzie Hall. Nothing. I had my cell phone and a pen in the stack. And it was just go. And I would get up in front of the adjudicator and I would go. From day one, I was very fortunate to get that kind of amount of experience in litigation. And what it resulted in, inadvertently, at least for me, but exactly what Jon intended, was I became very experienced LTB very fast. And I just found that it was always the most fun from a legal standpoint because the tribunals, they're a little bit less strict than courts. You have to understand that in court, there's a very, very formal, very specific way to do things, which I'm completely comfortable with. But it's nicer to kind of have the fun of the leeway and be able to make arguments a little bit more creatively and have a more of a conversational trial than necessarily everything being very strict.
You got to call the judge, your worship, and there's bailiffs.
Yeah. I have to tell you the story sometime that I showed up to POA with the wrong pants on. It's a funny story.
They chew you out?
They remember. They chewed me out, and so as it was in the first little bit practicing paralegal, I had a habit of driving up to the city from Kingsville because I was living with my parents. This is back when I first started. And I had a habit of always being in the city in the morning. And that was because Jon, wanting to always throw me to the wolves, any call that was, "We need a paralegal this morning in court," Jon would give it to me.
Yeah.
So great experience, great money, impresses my boss, be ready. So I'm sitting in my car behind the EB Games on Walker, screwing around on my phone because I'm not quite ready to go into the office yet. And I get this call from Jon. It's like, "Hey, Evan, you got your suit?" I'm like, "Yeah, I've been here for a couple hours." It was like, 7:20 a.m. And I looked back into the backseat of my car, and sure enough, there's my suit jacket, and I can see the pants sticking out the bottom, and it's all black. And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, I got it. He goes, "Well, we need to appear for somebody who's got a violation for a trucker." So the truckers, they have to keep very specific journal logs regarding their trips. And this one received a fine.
So they don't drive too many hours on the road.
Right.
Yeah.
This one received a fine from the Ministry of Transportation having to do with that. And so I went, "Yeah, I can absolutely do that." It was an easy argument. I won't get into it, but it was a pretty easy fight. So in I go. Problem is, when I stroll in there late, because of course it's a last minute call.
So that's one strike against you.
Oh yeah. I'm strolling in there late, and all these lawyers turn around and look to me, and then they've got the justice of the peace up there with all their clerks, and they look up at me. I'm just standing there. And I've got on this black suit jacket, this white t-shirt and a tie, and then jet black cargo pants with the pockets.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Mismatched socks as always. And I walk in there just head held high. I'm like, it's too late now. And if somebody doesn't show up for this guy, he's going to get fined.
Yeah. So own it and go do your job.
My pride be darned in that regard. And And it was so funny. I remember getting up in front of him and I was getting the terminology wrong. That was when I remembered that I had to say your worship because I tried your honor. And I also tried settlement. That's not the right word to use. It's very specific.
Okay.
And I remember when I was leaving, I thought I was going to get away with it too. I was the last one. They say me very last because I was the youngest. And that's how they do it. They do it from like age and date of call. And I'm reaching for the door and I hear, Mr. Will, from this justice. And I go, yes, your worship. And I don't turn around and I can feel myself turning red. And she goes, the next time that you appear before this court, you will just respectfully. Is that correct? Yes, your worship. I was there a year later and I walked in and they remembered.
That's hilarious.
I like telling the story, and I tell the story to students sometimes because, well, one, you have to understand that we're there to help people. And if you can't just quit because you don't have the right pants that day. And also, standing out sometimes can be good, and making somebody laugh, making the day interesting could be good. I'm sure they thought I was real bold, not even acknowledging it, just walking right in like, this is fine.
Good for you for showing up then. Okay.
But that's it. Yeah.
Okay, so landlord-tenant board has been a big part of what you do, and so you fight on behalf of tenants. You also fight on behalf of landlords, and I mean, there's bad apples in every bunch, and so there's always people that are doing things outside the lines, and some of it's I didn't know, right? There's some ignorance sometimes too, or naivety maybe.
I would say most people aren't malicious in my experience.
Yeah,
most people aren't malicious. Yeah.
Okay. Here's a couple topics. So one is that COVID kind of disrupted court. So when I met you at City Hall, you were going there to physically file paperwork.
Oh, yeah.
And then when you go to the court, you were actually appearing before the justice. So now almost never real court.
Yeah. So what happened is that before COVID, something that a lot of people forget was that the Landlord and Tenant Board was experiencing delays before. And they had already been considering making things more efficient. Okay. So when COVID hit, it was all the reason they needed to completely transition to online. So they don't have any in-person hearings anymore. You can still go to Service Ontario to file, but it's strongly discouraged and it's not the same as it was. There's a whole new online portal now that you have to use, which actually has been making teaching the students difficult. But.
And then typically all the hearings are over Zoom, right? The adjudicators are at their house or at the office.
Yeah, they have that the Tribunals Ontario splash behind them, and I don't know where they're. I think it's usually their homes or at some kind of office where they're dealing with these things.
And has that brought efficiency to the matters?
Yes, it's a lot more efficient. It's a lot faster. I mean, digital space is a lot easier to come by than physical.
Yeah. Now, there was obviously significant delays during COVID because at one point, Doug Ford announced no new evictions for non-payment of rent. And so some people took that as, I no longer have to pay rent, which wasn't the case. It's just if you didn't pay rent, the landlord would still file the paperwork accordingly. And then once we got past that point in COVID, then it would still obviously catch up with you. And you're still encouraged to pay your rent, obviously. But some people heard it the way they wanted it rather than how it was intended.
Yeah, they were referring to enforcement. That's it.
Yeah. And so that created a backlog where all of a sudden it went from maybe 3 months for filing to hearing to decision to, we dealt with some things that were 12, 16 months.
Yeah. You showed some real patience there during that. You had some of the worst of it.
Now, I think it's known around the province now that there's a real issue there and they are working to get the backlog shorter. One thing that I had asked you is who actually would hold the Landlord-Tenant Board accountable? And you said the ombudsman?
Yes, the ombudsman is responsible for that.
Okay. And so what have they implemented since, or what was their claim that's causing the Landlord-Tenant Board to pick up the slack? Right.
So I can definitely answer this. I teach administrative law at St. Clair, so I have a little bit of perspective for you. But what happens is that every tribunal, and the Landlord-Tenant Board is one of those tribunals, they're empowered by legislation as a government body that takes care of a certain jurisdiction, in this case, the Landlord and Tenant Board. So their mandate is to make fair and expeditious hearings. Easily. Okay? So what the ombudsman does is the ombudsman reaches out to them and says, well, we are specialists in making recommendations on how you can become more efficient and how you can deal with whatever issues. Could be efficiency, could be whether or not need to hire more people, any number of things. And then it's the Landlord Tenant Board's obligation under its enabling legislation to follow those recommendations. And then that's how that works. If they don't follow the recommendations, then, well, somebody's going to get in trouble because that's in breach of their mandate.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're receiving criticism and I guess therefore help from the ombudsman now to try and streamline them. And they would oversee many of the tribunals that you work with. Like there's the land tribunal, there's is it employer, employee.
So the employment law can be tribunals. It can also be courts.
Okay.
It depends on like what the issue is. But yes, there's a bunch of stuff for tribunals in Ontario. Without getting too much into it, there's there's the License Appeal Board and there's the Immigration Refugee Board. ODSP also has a board, stuff like that. I think there's 14 in total, just in that bracket alone, like with the LTB.
Yep.
The ombudsman's kind of like, we have this a lot in government, and until I got into law, I didn't really understand it, but it's literally a body that exists to audit and make recommendations. And there's tons of these bodies that work with different points of government where that's just their job. And their job is to sit there and basically babysit, for lack of a better term, to help keep things moving. And I did speak to the ombudsman myself. I had some issues with the matter. I did have an interview with them. I've seen firsthand how they make their recommendations and stuff.
Yep.
And it really does seem to be working. I don't mean to be too optimistic on you, but it does seem to be working. And it's slow, like I think anything government, because I mean, any change too fast could be irresponsible in my opinion. So it's going to be a little bit slow, but it's working.
I like Jon's approach to just like throwing you into it. And we have a book club essentially that meets at our office, and we read a book called Unreasonable Hospitality. Mm-hmm. And it's about a restaurant group from New York City and kind of their journey from taking a restaurant that was doing okay to we want to become like Michelin star certified and all that kind of stuff. And so it's a lot of management practices and stories about their growth and how they did things in a special way. And their management team really, really believed in just giving people more responsibility than they thought they might have deserved or that they were ready for. And essentially they would watch them grow, because it's easy when you have a leader and they're telling you what to do to just take orders and do it. But when you flex that, like we go to the gym to, get our heart rate up and to expand muscles, and they grow when they heal from expansion. And similarly, if you put people into tough scenarios, they tend to grow or leave. And so he wanted to promote from within and create qualified leaders. And he did that by often throwing them to the wolves, kind of like Jon did with you, and making that muscle get flexed.
I absolutely agree. Jon's an incredible mentor, and he definitely believed in empowerment from the beginning. He's always, from the beginning, anything that he could, within reason, give me the authority to make a decision for myself, I've been given it. I mean, from day one, I was allowed to deny clients that I thought, we wouldn't be able to help properly. And I've had the authority to change billing, give discounts, all kinds of things. Even make changes in the office, change our retainer contract, change our policies. Over the years, the things that I've done, he's always been very empowering in that regard. And one of the biggest things I felt I'm grateful for, and I wish that more employers would do if they could, is follow Jon's policy of something is not a problem until it's a problem. If I made a mistake, or I said something embarrassing, or I hurt the business in some way, if I could fix that thing and learn from what I did, he never ever had any complaints. And I've always been so grateful for that, because part of this flexing this muscle you're talking about is you got to rip the muscles to repair them, and that means making mistakes.
That's kind of along the line of Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Oh, interesting.
So he sees a lot of issue with our school system in North America, and he doesn't like that the way things are graded and tested, and essentially we punish kids for doing things wrong. And he's like, well, no, you don't learn you don't really take home learning until you've tried something and it didn't work, and then you take a step back and go, okay, why didn't it work? And if it's for, a really young kid, why doesn't 2 + 2 = 4? Right? Well, let's break this apart. And so instead of punishing or giving kids poor grades for making mistakes, he goes, we should be encouraging kids to try things so that they do make mistakes, but focusing on how to, get them to learn from the mistake that they made to improve the process moving forward.
Yeah, I know for the college, they give us a little bit of leniency in the way that we do our grading, provided it, follows their policies. And one of the things I like to do is insist to students, one, I do not deduct marks. You earn a mark for something that you did. You don't earn a mark for something you didn't do. That's the first thing. And the second thing is exactly what you said. And I think that what you might have been touching on, correct me if I'm wrong, is the difference between remembering something and understanding something.
Big time.
And I always say to my students, you could get the question wrong on the essay. You could miss the whole point. But if I feel like you understand what I wanted you to understand, I will reward you appropriately. And I've always felt that went the mile, like in my last couple of years teaching. And I feel like with Jon, like with me, that was it exactly, is that he wanted me to go out there and apply myself. And I always felt like what I did made a difference too. And I think that was useful versus like other employers that I've had. It's that empowerment you mentioned, Yep. It doesn't necessarily need to be authority. It's just, if I succeed here, the good's being done because I succeeded. And I remember back when we were at Mackenzie Hall, way back during my first year, I remember saying to Jon, hey, things are going rough with this one client. I got a great settlement for him. He doesn't want to take it. I'm afraid this man is going to miss out on several $1,000s in settlement. The check is in front of him.
Yeah.
And I said, Jon, you got to bail me out. Jon was like, nah, I'm not bailing you out. You want this guy to get this? Go earn it. And I had literally in front of Mackenzie Hall, you should have seen me. I had a shouting match with one of my clients.
Yep.
This like 62-year-old stubborn man who was there for the principal. And he gave me a call a few months later and thanked me for getting that check in his hand at the end of the day.
Awesome.
And that felt great. If Jon had been more controlling, more willing to step in the moment things weren't looking great for me or to reflect on the business, I never would have developed those skills.
Yeah. Okay. So you've mentioned, we've kind of followed your career from student to, practicing paralegal now. And we keep hearing instructor at Clair College. How the heck did that come about?
Yeah. So, how's the best way to explain this? When you first start, it's like having like the laminate, clean on your license kind of an expression. Everything's so wide-eyed and bright, and you see the justice system and you say to yourself, hey, like I want to make a difference. But there's a lot of complexities. Not everything goes well. There have been cases that didn't go great for me. Luckily, not very many, but it happened. And over time, I became a little bit burnout. I became a little bit jaded. Okay. And one of my fellow paralegals at the office, kind of like different companies, but we're all kind of in the same office building. I was in the boardroom one day having lunch or whatever, and she said to me, hey, Evan, I need some help. I'm teaching at Clair College, and I could use a guest speaker to kind of just come in and talk to the students. And when I was done giving the talk, she was blown away. And she said, "What? This was amazing. Like you're a natural." I said, "Oh, really? Like, okay. I didn't really realize, right?" Yeah. And she suggested maybe putting my name in and kind of rekindling that fire. And I put my name in. I did the interview, and I just fell in love with it. And I find that now I just don't burn out as much. It keeps me sharp too. When students ask questions, it's not like being out in the field and being able to say to a client, I'm sorry, I don't quite know that. I will look it up to you and I will send you a report by email in, the next 48 hours. There's a student talking to you.
There's a saying that you really thoroughly understand things when you're required to teach them to someone else.
Yeah, the student says, hey, what's the answer to this? And like, you can only say, I don't know so many times. You really stoop and read it so many times. Not to mention the repetition, right? Like I am going over these subjects in so much more detail than you would need in the field. Yep. Way more detail than you need in the field. And I'm starting to really, I don't memorize it all.
I was going to say that's to help them understand it, not to memorize it.
That's right. Yeah. For me, I have the full understanding. Now, where I'm at, a little bit of memorization does me some good. Maybe being able to, cite specific, cases or piece of legislation off the top of my head is useful. Now that I have a more thorough understanding, of course, after my career or how long I've been at this so far, how to go and find these things. So it's kind of the opposite for me and the students. I'm learning to memorize, but they need to learn to understand.
Yep.
And it's been very good for the business. I feel like I'm more on top of things. I feel like I don't burn out, and I definitely have that spark back, which is really nice. I think it's an excellent compliment to being a paralegal, and I'm lucky that it came about when it did, because it was getting a little bit rough for me.
Cool. It's a real estate based show. So to bring it back to real estate, as a paralegal, do you have some advice for landlords and tenants to maintain the peace and to get along with each other and to stay out of like nobody wants to be in LTV, right? Yeah.
So the thing is, it's kind of ironic really. But Jon and I always say nobody comes to us on a good day.
Yeah.
So the fact is, if a landlord or a tenant is coming to talk to me, they're already not having a good day.
Yep. And
a lot of the time, and I don't mean to generalize too much, but a lot of the time this can be avoided through cooperation. The Landlord and Tenant Act, it outlines exactly what the rights and responsibilities of people are. And you don't have to go and read the act to learn this. There's tons of stuff online. And even a lease, the government standard lease, it has a lot of this stuff just on the front few pages. And I always say to landlords, first piece of advice, it might seem counterintuitive because a lot of landlords feel like the tenant is like the them. They're not the us, they're not the landlords, they're the tenants, they're separate. But the truth of the matter is that if you just give a little binder with all the printouts of like the rules and responsibilities of each party to the tenant, it goes a long way to helping the relationship. I find that misunderstandings lead to legal action so often. People's prides get hurt, they get upset.
Poor communication could avoid a lot of these.
Yeah, understanding rights, responsibilities, proper communication, and just willing to give each other a little bit of leeway. I mean, push come to shove, landlording is not just this, it's not an investment like going and buying stocks that give you a return over time. It's not, it's an active business. And I think that landlords need to watch their expectation in that regard and look at that and say, this is not just a house that prints money for me. This is an active business that sometimes gives me more profits, sometimes gives me less because I have responsibilities that I have to uphold.
And it's also a home for my customer, which is the tenant that's paying me every
right.
month.
And on the same time, the tenants need to understand that what they're doing is they're at a temporary living place. That's a big one. That it's not their property and that they have responsibilities as well as rights in order to make this whole thing work. And I think that a lot of the time, tenants get carried away with their rights and they forget that they also have responsibilities, and they forget that it's temporary, and they forget that it's a business. And I think that if everybody just has a realistic understanding of what this is, again, it's kind of ironic because I'm saying show the tenants all their rights and responsibilities. And then I'm saying to landlords and tenants, communicate with each other and be okay with the fact that this is temporary. But from what I've seen over the years, it's those tenancies that last the longest. Because both parties are happy. A tenant could be there for 30 years, keeping in mind that this is a temporary living space because that's respecting the landlord's rights.
Yep.
At the same time, the landlord could be like, I love this, everything's going smoothly. And that's the thing about tenanting, and I say this all the time. It can work, and it can work really, really well for everyone. It's just unfortunate that I don't really get to see that. I don't really hear the happy stories. Yeah. But I know it's a thing because otherwise every tenancy in the province, not to mention I rent from you and I'm happy.
Yeah. No, and I think you bring up a good point, which is it an investment? Yes. Is it like any other investment? No. And because as the landlord, there's real life implications that can be made to us as the landlord if the tenant doesn't pay rent, or if they're fighting with another tenant that's located on the same property, but also there's real world implications to the tenant too. Like what you said is important. And I think more people need to understand that renting is meant to be a temporary measure, because let's say the landlord gets offered a job out of province and says, well, I'm not here to maintain the property or to keep, so I need to sell that, or I need to sell it in order to buy a house for my family to live in. Well, then that tenancy is going to come to an end, either because of the sale of the property and the new owner wants to, live in it as a primary residence, or if you're renting a bachelor apartment and you get married and have a kid, we know that long term it's not going to work for us to stay in this bachelor apartment. So it is meant to be a temporary relationship, and both parties need to be respectful of each other in that regard. However, there's real world implications as the tenant or the landlord about what's happening in the life of the other one.
Exactly. It's not that I'm I'm not necessarily an authority on business. To be fair, I'm more of an authority on paralegal law and landlord and tenant. But from that real estate perspective, I try to encourage my clients who are landlords and even explain to tenants, more than an investment, see it as a living asset. See it as something that it's malleable. It needs care, but it's also an asset that, as you've explained to me in the past, can really pay off because of owning that property for a while and then selling it again, and there's that increase to the value that these properties get over time, and exactly what the rent goes to. Maybe it's paying property tax, maybe it's paying off mortgage. There's all kinds of business strategies that can be used to customize how that tenanted property is being used as a business person.
Yep.
You get a lot more control and a lot more interaction with that than you would with just buying stocks on the market.
Yeah, and again, it comes with responsibility too. So there's no emotion when you sell a stock, right? You're not putting anybody out of a home if you sell a stock. But I've always said, if I buy Apple stock, there's two ways that my net worth increases from owning that Apple stock, and it's either they pay out a dividend because they had a good quarter, so they pay out their shareholders, or it appreciates over time, and then I recognize a gain when I sell it for more than I paid for it. With real estate, it's kind of a triple play, but there's some more that hide in there too. So appreciation, just like a stock, you can recognize from the real estate asset. Cash flow would be similar to the dividend of a stock, right? So I think most tenants don't think that landlords have mortgages, but the reality is most of them have mortgages, and they're not in a hugely strong cash flow. They may even be in a negative cash flow scenario. But if you bought on good principle and managed your debt well and things like that, there could potentially be cash flow, which would be similar to the dividend that a stock would provide. But then the other one is principal pay down. So if we're putting a loan on it and the tenant's paying rent every month, we're making a mortgage payment every month, and that's bringing the balance of our loan down. There's a few other things you can add into that too, which is sweat equity, improving it, putting a roof on may not necessarily increase the value of the property, but painting, kitchen, flooring, all that kind of stuff, you can do labor-intensive things that will increase the underlying asset value. Mm-hmm. You can refinance it based on, hey, you know what? Rates have come down in 2024 compared to what they were at in 2023. So you might go to a mortgage broker and refinance it and end up in a better cash flow position now, or drag out your amortization further. So it gives you a lot of other ways that asset can work for you. But the other one too is you could live in it, right? Yeah. If you ever find yourself in a position where maybe you sold your primary residence, or you're not sure what your future brings for you because you might be going into a different career, going back to school, again, might have gotten pregnant, whatever. But now you have something that you can live inside. And I always say to people, push comes to shove, Apple's been a great investment for a lot of people, same with so many other stocks. However, if World War III comes around, you can't eat Apple stock, but you can live in your rental property, right? Yeah. So everybody needs a house to live in. Not everybody needs to own stock in companies, but it then comes with the responsibility of, well, my tenant is my customer and I have to keep them happy, and I have obligations that I have to meet in exchange for the benefits I'm receiving from this too.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you said. That's that package. That's something that I wish landlords knew more about and were advised more about, because the landlords I get that are constantly having problems, or landlords who are on the other side because I'm representing tenants who have been mistreated by their landlords, they just think to themselves, okay, the rent gets paid to me and it's my job to upkeep the unit. It's okay, yes, but to be fair, a responsible landlord, I think, is considering and interacting with all of the things that you mentioned, right? Is seeing that for what it is in its whole, this customizable, this detailed investment experience. And it's those ones that from what I've seen, that have the most success because of the way that mentality that they keep for that. for sure. And the ones that just think of it too much, like, yep, I just get the rent and I just maintain the
just
unit.
extracting money from my
exactly.
tenant.
That's not the way to do it. And I think that there's so many options that, you've even listed with like the whole evaluation, the paying down the principal on it, the being able to move into it, all these different values that you get out of that investment that I've got to say, it just seems like so many landlords don't even think about at all.
Well, they don't teach it, right? They don't teach this at university or college.
No.
It's a real world experienced one. And again, you're dealing with people and that's who your tenants are. And so there's quirks that come with that and there's meaningful relationships that can come out of it. Like
being involved in real estate, I've found that like you and your team are really like, you guys are really like frontliners when it comes to advising landlords on just like, the values of this and like what strategies are and like what mentalities to have. And just like open communication between landlords and tenant, I think that having professional advisors is very useful for people.
Yep.
And who better to turn to than the experts in real estate?
Yeah. Well, and you know what? A great tenant can be an asset also, right? Like if you're constantly bickering with your tenants, they're accusing you of not maintaining things, you're accusing them of being late on rent. Like a lot of that can be avoided if we just work to a common goal of I'll keep you happy, you keep me happy. Let's be, decent people and get along.
Yeah.
But a great tenant to me is an asset.
You're right. There's only so much that like I can preach about people skills and communication, push come to shove. There are just better tenants than others because they're, more patient, more understanding, more mature, any number of reasons. Maybe they're at a better place in life. If you get a tenant who's having a rough go of it, they might be a little bit less cooperative, depending on the experiences they've had. But those people skills, huge.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay. I think that's a good spot to wrap it up. So we talked about, your journey to becoming a paralegal, kind of how our management company came to be, your specialization in the landlord tenant board. We talked about, virtual court versus in-person court and filing, your journey to becoming an instructor to, paralegal students, all that kind of stuff. Any tips, tricks, last things you want to leave the audience with?
Yes, absolutely. Whether or not you're a landlord or a tenant, whether you're looking to sell a house, whether you're looking to get a vacant possession or you're looking to move on, I just really want everyone to understand that take it from somebody who does tons of landlord and tenant litigation. The best outcome is always one you find yourself between the parties. Look for settlement options and understand that there are tons of very binding and enforceable deals that you can make. You don't have to rely on trust, but a little bit of cooperation goes a long way. Willing to, if you're looking for a vacant possession as a landlord, being willing to pay out a little bit more on the sale of the house. It's being responsible for that person's life who you're affecting, and it's getting you back that use of that asset. And if you're a tenant, understand that, if the landlord needs the unit or you yourself are looking to move on, discuss settlement options. Don't just let it go nuclear and, have it in court. Sometimes in
maybe
court,
contact the paralegal before you need to
that's
use a paralegal.
Fair. And maybe, that exactly right. And sometimes in court, one party's happy. Oftentimes neither party's happy. That's just the nature of it. So, and then the last thing, of course, is yes, contact us before you need us. Right. And I know that that's, preaching to the choir with you because you, of course, have me always available to speak with you and your associates, but other landlords, they call us on the
11th
hour. Yeah, exactly. I have court tomorrow. Like, I'm fine. That's fun, but there's only so much I can do on a day's notice.
Yep.
More than happy to go in there and fight the good fight, but also maybe a few months ago we could have, saved both parties a lot of time and effort and money. Yep. So I'd say that's about it.
Cool. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's Evan Will, and he's a paralegal in Windsor. If you need any help with your landlord or tenant scenarios, thanks, Evan.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to the show, folks. Please keep in mind that this show is not offering legal, financial, or accounting advice, but rather opinions and experiences in the world of real estate from the host and the guests. If you're enjoying the show, please rate, review, and share with your friends and colleagues. And if you think that there's someone that needs to be on this show, please feel free to connect them with me. Or if there's a topic that should be discussed, feel free to let me know. Thank you so much, and bye for now.